It is very rare for me to do sequels to videos from the past, be they weeks old, years old, months old. But I felt if I could perhaps speak about this topic in a way that was more relaxed but also direct in its implications, people might be able to get what I'm saying a little bit easier. Now, by the title of this, one would become confused. They would say dark times. What are you talking about? What do you mean? Let me say a little Dirk. And I would specify that there will always be issues as it pertains to the U.S., the world, the internet. But when people are in some cases blissfully unaware of those problems as a result of the places they seek out their information, it becomes much more difficult for that problem to be solved. And when problems are not addressed with any sense of urgency, they can become dilemmas, and then dilemmas will turn into uh, global issues that require even more urgency than they may have when they were first spotted or noticed. So, for example, I've mentioned um, the consistency of African Americans murdering each other. And currently, right now, people are saying, well, that's proportionate to other race groups, uh, and it will become an epidemic when that group in particular finds itself going extinct. And you won't be able to blame anyone else but that group for that circumstance. But again, that was a problem that could have been solved before it led to further bloodshed. Um, and that's one issue out of many that people seem to ignore, and I can understand why it would be ignored, because you're more likely to see the police incidents on television than um, the regular day-to-day homicides, because after a while we get so used to those we don't even bat an eye hardly at the event, because it's so recurring and consistent. And unfortunately, when someone sees something on television, in spite of it happening less statistically than other crimes, they become convinced, oh, this is something that needs to be concerned and worried about. And look, you can make the case that the police incidents, do warrant some level of cause for concern. I've been one to say that the current criminal justice system is very flawed. You have a number of people who go to prison over the three strikes rule and other things that can be deciphered and figured out for. But we're talking about just basic problems that are very solvable because they're man-made. These are issues that if enough people came together and said we're not gonna have that anymore, it would be fixed. In some cases, weeks. In other cases, days, possibly even hours. Take for example the claim that many people make about African American males committing crimes. A lot of people will say that these are the bad guys that don't get anything in life. But I actually pitched this earlier. If all, matter of fact, just if all women between the ages of 18 to maybe 38 or early 40s, when they're in their supposed sexual prime, signed the declaration that said, I will not have sex with you or anything to do with you in the event that you commit a crime, be it a felony or a misdemeanor, you would see at least that group's involvement in crimes drop by maybe 90% in a week. It would go down so quickly, because let me tell you something. If you were to go up to many a men and ask them, do you want to live a prosperous life in a um, very well-to-do neighborhood by yourself, or would you rather be in a middle-class environment where you have, sex with consistency, and all you have to do is just get up and have sex? They would pick the latter. This is a reality that people shouldn't feel ashamed about necessarily, because we all have human impulses, but it is to say that there are ways in which sex can be used to positively bring about change in society. But that's just one other issue that could be fixed again in hours or days if people got together in mass and said we're not having that anymore. Now, the other problems that we're currently facing on the political front are this misconception, in my opinion anyway, and obviously my beliefs are always going to be opinions. There are some people who think the current climate is good. Um, is this consistent belief that if you vote for members of either party, you're having an actual difference in your choice. Now, I say that because a lot of people, for example, ignore their statewide elections, but focus very heavily on presidential elections. And one of the arguments I've made, especially when it comes to Trump, is that he is too similar to Obama for the people to have voted for him that like the idea of him being changed to still think that way a year and almost a half into him being in office. For example, Trump retained Obama's Afghanistan war. Another example, he kept Bush's surveillance state that continued under Obama. Um, Another instance would be the lack of action on the banks. That's been going on since the Clinton years. Another example would be there's something else in there as well, but there are a multitude of issues in which those two have shown a consistency of having um, that really solidify my view that you cannot believe just because someone's of the opposing party you're getting an actual change. And listen, this isn't an endorsement of the Democrats at all or some condemnation of Trump because personally I was disgusted with Obama over his continuations of many of Bush's policies. But I'm even more frustrated by the idea that we live in a world where people can so easily look up what administration to administration does and still be convinced it matters what party you back. Personally, the only real differences between Democrats and Republicans are gun control and maybe net neutrality. That's about it. And then maybe slightly less hawkish when it comes to wars. But even then, you still had many Democrats who backed the Iraq War um, when it initially came out. And let me say hello to Wicked Gesture. Look at the political climate, it's a mess. I agree. Let me say hello to O'Donohue. Greet both of you guys. Um, but then you go to other issues. Student loan debt, that's so awful. And you know, it was really funny because people have this thing where they tend to focus, and this is another problem that we're currently having. Um, yeah, I like the fog. That background I chose to have as the thumbnail. Another example would be the fact that there are people who have complained about my rhetoric as opposed to um, addressing current dilemmas which afflict certain groups. So we all remember the incident with the transgender individual. There was a commenter who left this comment about how I was so disrespectful and it was so awful that I would say this about this person. And you know that comment kind of got me to think to myself, you know, what are the real pressing issues of transgenders as it applies to the U.S.? And I found out that they are 40% likely to commit suicide, and that's way over what any other American does, and 15% likely to be in poverty. So a fifth of them are likely to experience um, living in some level of homelessness, and this is three times the amount of the average American. So when I sat there and really pondered, I said, well, you know what? My comments calling this person he or she or whatever are not as bad as the fact that they chose to, insult me first. And it certainly isn't as bad as the actual issues afflicting that community um, in mass. Okay, Wicked Gesture says, we live in a political where both parties are pointing fingers at the other for who's right and who's wrong. People don't care about the real issues. O'Donohue asked if I remember join the Boy Scouts. No, I don't. Fill me on that story as I speak. Um, but that was another issue of just people being more. This person was more bothered by what I was saying than what was actually happening with the group that they claimed to back and support. And sure enough, the person who insulted me turned out to be racist toward Caucasians, which I found even more ironic because more often than not, the majority of people advocating for the rights of the LGBT community in the U.S. are Caucasians because they're the majority of people in the U.S. It's just as simple as that. Um, but that's another dilemma that we have. This idea that people will be more upset or more bothered by what someone has to say than what's actually going on. You know, this kind of misdirected outrage. We're more upset with the fact that you called this person he, she, and other terms, but not the fact that transgenders, for example, are likely are 3 times as likely as the average American to be in poverty and, well, rather unemployed, my mistake. And also, 2/5 of them will attempt suicide. And these are things that they're not speaking about, they're not going to address. Found and joined after the parents threatened to sue them. All right, thank you for the update, O'Donoghue. I had no idea about that story. Um, but you go back to circumstances all over the place, and I guess it can really be boiled down to the idea of issues afflicting the world that we so often turn a blind eye to. Like the Israeli-Palestinian conflict that's been going on for decades, and people will think, oh, those mean old Palestinians don't want to give the Israelis, the time of day. When in reality, since I think it was 1996, we've had the same problem of having an Israeli Prime Minister, Netanyahu, who's gone out of his way to make sure there is no peace settlement, that group continues to be treated as subhuman and is subjected to its own form of apartheid that's on the level of what was experienced by Africans and by Black Africans in South Africa. So it's another problem that's going on. And the only reason I don't go after it as aggressively as the other things that are facing the U.S. is because when you have so many crises on top of each other, and some are abroad, whereas there are domestic issues, and we have a load of those, I just don't feel the need to give it as much priority. Okay, VVS says it's crazy because a lot of things are not that hard to fix, just requires some effort and an open mind. Yeah, another example is this idea that we have to blame the president for every single issue when it comes to picking out which elected official to go after for problems we face on a daily level. There are more people upset with Trump over their taxes than their tax commissioner or their governor. There are more people who are upset with many of the laws that are currently being passed in Congress, but are not saying, I'm going to vote against this senator or this congressman, because they pay very, very, very almost none attention whatsoever to their elected official. Let me say hello to ALU. Also, just in case you missed it, I mentioned the thing about signing that declaration of no sex if you are committing crimes, which that alone should tell you something about a chunk of females. Like, you have people who come on here and defend them over stuff and to say, oh, it's so messed up that you would, talk about them in the way that you do. But look, there are some that don't do this, but there is a wide variety who are completely fine with the males in their lives acting in manners that are, you know, not considered desirable. Just arrived, so not sure of the context what you're saying, but a lot of the things it gets criticized for not as human and not letting them flee before an attack. Frog United looks cool. Okay, Mr. I love your username is problematic. Just letting you know. But there's just such this wide variety of domestic issues that, I mean, I can talk about the political stuff and I know it will cause people to leave the chat room, but it's so intricate. You have the misrepresentation of what's actually going on, or rather the misdirecting of it, because people will go after Trump or whoever's president as opposed to their congressmen, senators, and governors, um, and just completely ignore actual matters that are afflicting them. You know, a lot of Trump supporters won't say anything about the lack of concern for the environment or climate change. They'll pretend that's not going on. And even if you confront them about this and say, hey, he's not doing anything about that, they'll still rationalize it to themselves. They'll say, well, you know, he did something about immigration, so that's okay. I've seen that happen so many times in the past year and a half. It's been mind-boggling. Um, Wicked gesture. So I think the reason why problems don't get solved, rather it turns to a fight on what's the right way to solve. A lot of people go into problems stubborn and closed-minded. Well, there are just practical solutions to many of these problems. If you look at DACA, where all those Democrats were talking about how evil Trump was for, repealing the rights of illegal immigrants that were on there. If they were truly charismatic, they would say, we're going to start some kind of commission or group to go and take these illegal immigrants and get them legalized prior to the deadline running out for their deferments. If you think about the inner city violence, you would have people that live in those cities say, you know what, this mayor governor isn't doing anything to address this problem going on over here. So let's just completely cut off any backing for that person. Okay, I'm getting a person who I don't think that's the actual group. You confused me for a moment. I got a little surprised. So let me say hello to World Class BS, or whatever. And I can't get in trouble because that's someone's name. They just come and say yo. They don't feel the need to go any further into their greeting or why they chose to come in here, or to come here rather. I mean, there's just so much wrong, and I've listed a couple of these things, but it seems as if every time I just sit back and think and say, wait a second, that's problematic too. Oh yeah, this is an issue as well. I get oftentimes into feeling as if the more you become concerned with these issues, and I even had one of these commenters, these chicks I was talking to say, "Oh well, you're an urge to negotiate a replacement," and they refused. Yeah, Splendor, we can go over that later. There was the Democrats gave caved in too easily on that one, in my opinion. Um, but even that, I mean, I still wouldn't consider it I personally think that it was a waste of time to even be that bothered with immigration as it is. When you have people living in slums and not even being able, just in terms of education, to name a good chunk of it of their heads of state in their country's history, I think that there's too many other things going on that are problematic for people who were born here that really should serve as the focal point of problems. Really, the illegal immigration issue was just one that was of more concern to many of the nativists that were bothered by that group getting larger in number. But that, again, that's something that can be deciphered and gone after in a separate stream. It shouldn't be the central point of discussion here. But you have too often people who have, and I think we've also, this goes back to just the cultural problems that we have. Many of us know we're not indestructible. Many of us know that we're not guaranteed tomorrow or next week or the year after that. But it seems as if too large in number are these groups of people who say, you know what, I'm just going to go hang out at this party. I'm going to say I'm not going to do this until I'm 30. And it almost becomes bothersome to me simply for the fact that I know so many guys who I believed were worth something that chose to become frustrated with the current climate of dating and the fact that there were so many women that they felt weren't willing to make a commitment. They just decided, you know what? I don't like myself. I don't like what's going on. All of it sucks. And I really hated them being put through that. But then you ask yourself, well, who do you blame? And many of my detractors would say, well, you're trying to blame the women for the way that these guys feel, but the way they feel could have been solved by women. See, when people tell you this thing about work on yourself, improve yourself, all of this, it's that endless pit that's supposed to convince you that there is some way of making adjustments to your own life that supposedly is going to coincidentally rub off on other people. You know, I would say that my productivity in getting many of the things I want done this year has increased um, substantially from last year because some of the resources I didn't have and many of the things I just wasn't capable of doing. But I haven't noticed a difference in the way I'm treated by people who encountered me before then and who are encountering me now. And you know, we can make the case of, well, maybe they're not noticing anything, but if they're not noticing, is it really my job to inform them of that? So the endless pit was also irritating. And Nostalgia Critic came in here and made a comment, and I kind of just wrote it off. Um, so he, he's he's tuckered out too, or tucked out as well, whichever way you want to refer to it. But I really also have noticed a recurring theme where it seems as if people have this mentality that if you just pretend something's not going on, it gets better. Don't talk about the political climate. It'll get better. And I've had people say that they have this. Let me say hello to now that day has come seven. They have this idea that if you just let enough time pass, things improve on their own. And you know, people have this line about how things are made to happen, and they are. For example, children won't be born if two parents don't decide to get into bed and you know play hopscotch on each other. Those kids are made to happen. Okay, Splendora Gaming says, "Oh yeah, and lefties have started calling in those terrorists and has been banning them and preventing them from talking, all because one unstable guy did a vehicle attack." O'Donohue says the SJW seem to never stop. Splendora says they call it insult and ideology. Okay, now that day has come is laughing about hopscotch. I mean, whatever you want to call it, you know, torso smash, hot boy on girl action or hot girl on boy action, whichever one you want to refer to it as. That if they weren't doing it, you wouldn't see people being born. I'm using that as an example of the fact that most things of substance are created from someone saying, I want this to be a thing. Those movies that people like to rush out and sit in the same spot for 2 hours to go check out are made because someone said, I want that to be a thing. That's the way life works. You know, all this stuff about natural and, you know, she'll come to you naturally and naturally the crime rate of black on black violence will go down. All of that is just a load of bupkis. Okay, when they tell you to work on yourself, you're really doing things for other people, if that makes sense. AOU Blossom says, and I agree with that. VVS says hogwash. Yeah. Wait a second, VVS, are you calling me a pig? If so, I must inform you, you can only say that toward, direct that insult toward police officers. Personally, I wouldn't do it, but you know, some people have taken to doing that. That's apparently topical now. That's stylish. To respond to Splendora Gaming and his thing about the incels being called terrorists. Yeah, that's called disproportionate or the selective outrage thing. So, for example, if you know, most people who play video games don't shoot up schools. Um, but after Columbine, people went around and were looking for uh, things to blame. You know, there has to be something in the culture. It can't just be that these were people who had problems. No, it has to be something that they're doing that thousands of other people are doing that and aren't facing this issue. Okay, Splendora says, and just guys for being unable to pair up for whatever reason, that's not an ideology. I agree. I have no you know, disagreements with that. O'Donohue says most, yeah, I agree with that one as well. Um, there's just so many problems. Like, okay, forget the relationship stuff. Go back for a moment to political things. Um, Again, you have people who have this idea that, and I've encountered this a couple of times. They will, and this is going back to kind of culturally, where people will insult someone over their political belief. And look, it's not, there's nothing wrong with thinking someone is whatever way because they don't view a political issue as you do, you know, whatever. But most of us know not to openly say that to the person we want to answer. I left a comment on this video a while back where I was talking about I didn't vote for the major party candidates from either party this last presidential election because I thought both of them were mediocre. And this person writes back and says, "Quit the equivocating BS," and starts asking me, you know, how could you not see this? And you know, is actually trying to get me to respond. And you know, someone else leaves a comment afterward, and I basically, you know, say in my head, well, I would have actually been more tempted to answer back to that first person if they hadn't have chosen to insult me while pressing me to answer them back. It doesn't work that way. See, we seem to have that when we get caught up in our feelings or um, you know, emotions, we seem to forget that the other people we speak with also have feelings, that they're also human. And it's that lack of morality that has caused so many of the issues we have today. That's why you can have tens of people die in some mass shooting, and then all these politicians say, thoughts and prayers, and then take hundreds of thousands of dollars from some gun group. Okay, I don't know who scoring 57 is talking to. But yeah, there's and arguably the people who are the supposed biggest SJWs actually feel the need to go and be upset with, um, you know, what someone else is saying and will respond back to them and argue. I don't know who Aaron Griffin's talking to. He can explain who it is. It's where people just are not able to realize attempting to insult me will not yield any better consequences for any of us. But yeah, ALU, I hope you saw that example. And these really are the problems that we also face. And that was a perfect example of everything that is wrong with trying to have a dialogue in the current era. Regardless of one's opinions on my views, those that choose to insult the person speaking in what can be considered a respectful manner are not causing or yielding any better results for anyone, um, because they're not offering solutions. They're not giving you an alternative. It's just a continuation of the same failed stances that have continued in the past, that have failed in the past, rather. Really ask yourself, all those who saw that, what did that accomplish? No, but AOU, it should, this, and again, this is why it's dark times. If you cannot so much as have a discussion with a person about an issue or topic, then what good are we? Ask yourself, what good will the comments of that user, or what positive result will those comments have yielded to our current circumstance? You know, after asking what I was speaking about in a very disrespectful manner, what proposal was he going to offer? should be to other people's. No, I think that if someone is willing to have a discussion and dialogue, let me respond to scoring, it does not, you're more likely to have a lessening of a chance of actually getting a result that yields positive consequences if you choose to get into these matches of name calling and insulting the other person. That's why oftentimes when there's these political rallies, as you saw during Trump's campaign, many of those people were thrown out because all they were doing were holding signs and calling them racist. And again, what does that do? What did any of that accomplish? Because why would name calling stop the conversation? Because the other person is not usually is not willing to engage with someone that is trying to, or because they believe is insulting them. They feel is doing that. I mean, if you really cannot see where that would be problematic to having a discussion, I don't know what to tell you. But yeah, it is a cycle that needs to end. And it's, how do I explain this? Very narrowing of what can be accomplished when we decide to forego the substance of one's arguments and get into this game of trying to denounce the other person by some term. I don't understand where anyone would take up for doing that. And part of what is or what I thought was good about doing the streams was that it allowed me to interact with whoever might be offering an alternative or wanting to speak of a topic. So when you go on there and you try to um, lambast the person who's speaking and wage some one-man campaign, yeah, I'm not anti-Semitic scoring, so I don't know how else to put that for you. Hey, why are you saying wow AOU? Also, I really want to redirect us to the stream I did last night about what causes my somewhat reluctance to speak to most or just answer most inquiries. I hope this gives a good example of that, because think about it, when you go and speak to the same 4 or 5 guys that have been proven not to do this, it doesn't reflect negatively on them or yourself. It shows that they have the maturity and capacity to wage a discussion with someone that actually is fruitful for both of you. But I do want this to serve as a testament for why my position has shifted to that view. I'm not reading messages into anything you're saying. Why would you call it? Uh, oh, okay. Now I know. Yeah, but why would you call it SJ? Stick that at the end of it. If it's not, well, they tend to have, or it'll eventually make it there. But yeah, also in responding back to that comment, what proposal, and ask yourself this for anyone who supports the position of just going in a stream and insulting, which if you thought the person was just sitting there complaining and offering no ways of solving something, you wouldn't have checked out their content in the first place. That's why I can never understand about this supposed attitude of disliking someone but then going to see their content. There isn't a single person I follow with any regularity that I did not enjoy the material of. There just isn't. You know, I've never understood what that does. No, I'm talking about our dearly departed friend. Yeah, if you don't like the person, leave. Exactly. I've actually had to do that with some of my former subscriptions because they started making content I just wasn't interested in. I didn't go in their comment section or streams and call them out of their names or refer them disrespectfully. You know, I saw the ineffectiveness of doing that quite some time ago. But yeah, so to close out and recap everything we've been over, you have a political process where both parties advocate for a majority of the same positions. You have local and state representatives who are bought out by large corporations who are making more money in a day than a number of the constituents are making in their lifetimes. You have a middle class who is being burdened by paying the majority of the taxes. You have inner city violence in which race groups are killing off majority of their own kind, one in particular while being upset about the brutality by officers. And you have a very high number of decent males who find themselves discouraged with life and with living as a result of rejection and being ignored by their female contemporaries. These are not good times for really anybody at all, other than maybe the rich or the 1%, and even they have their own struggles and dilemmas. So maybe the next person who complains about my way of speaking can offer their own solutions, but we know that won't happen. As is the case with most detractors of the channel. Very little in the way of substance, a lot in the way of petty drama. And it doesn't matter if you discuss with them these topics and break down their points. They just spin and rotate in circles and act as revolving doors. CX is coming in just as we're closing out. How wonderful. Uh, yes, CX, we just talked about. Wait, okay, so you can't be upset about to people of your own group. Well, this comment is kind of confusing. So you can't be upset about racism if people of your own group kill you. No one's again misstatements on your part. My position has been that the outrage and the distrust and the attention should be directed in appropriation with the numbers of homicides. For example, if police officers, and this is a hypothetical, constituted 90% of African American homicides, I'm all for having mass protests calling for their imprisonments and reform in the police in the criminal justice system. But when 90% or more on average of African American homicides are committed by other African Americans, and then only that bottom 10 to even lower percent that is killed by cops becomes the centerfold of our focus, it's problematic. That's really something you can't understand. And no one's saying, hey, let's just completely not give any attention to it. But what I've seen from many of these advocacy groups is completely dismissive of the inner city violence, almost as if it's not happening. And I would like to believe a number of people who are dismissive are just uninformed because it's not being reported on the news or in any location. Then why bring up people being upset about cops? Why not just say you should be worried about criminals too? because it is to define the fact that we are living in an era of selective outrage, and this is not just conducive to black homicides. You know, I just spoke about the transgender defender who was more concerned about me calling one of them derogatory terms, which I only did after they insulted me, as opposed to dealing with the actual issues having to do with transgenders in the U.S., including the fact that almost a fifth of them are going to be unemployed, and two-fifths of them are going to try to kill themselves. Are those not more pressing issues than what someone has to say? Again, I have no problem defending my position. There's one that's much harder to do something about, and there's another that can probably be managed by the community. Which one is more harder to do? I don't understand. And how is it not selective if one group decides? Yeah, how is it not selective if one group decides we're going to pay all of our attention to this one issue and get so enraged about it? But if, you know, my brother gets gunned, you know, for example, gets gunned down by another African American, oh, it's just another day in the hood. That is selective. Are much harder to bring to justice, are caused by, well, imbalance. Okay, yeah, Dupe, we can go over that later. Cops are much harder to bring to. Hey, I'm not dismissing the difficulties relating to bringing them to justice, but again, you're not going very easy to get people who are criminal to justice. But if it's very easy, then why not address the topic? Why completely ignore it? Which is what's being done by these groups. Again, this is part of the running theme of, and this is something you're going to notice on this channel. People will take my position and they will misstate it or misrepresent it as part of a smear campaign. So, for example, if I say I am in favor or I am opposed to Trump, but also to Obama, someone who's a Trump supporter who thinks I'm being unfair to Trump will say, he's only saying that because he's a Democrat, in spite of the fact that I criticized the previous president who was a Democrat for doing the exact same thing as his follower. The one that's harder to deal with presents the bigger problem. How does it present the bigger problem if the bigger number? Yeah, okay, well that we've read enough of that. So I'm supposed to believe that going after the one who does 10% is the bigger problem as opposed to going after the one that does 90%. Just off that alone, people really believe this? Like AOU, I already know, we know your position. Like, already gets sent, how many cops for unjustly? Okay, so this represents the warped reality that we're currently experiencing. Oh. Yeah, I don't, and that's something I want you to understand, VVS. When you had the same guy who was talking about, well, the current climate of relationships isn't a failure, even though 70% of the children are being born out of wedlock, which theoretically would mean that the parents didn't like each other long enough to both be in the kid's life, or they, you know, stay together for the child because of the school to prison pipeline. You know, I said to him, there's no way you can blame a legislator, whether it's a president or a governor, for signing some legislation that made people open their legs and get with someone sexually that they didn't know anything about or weren't serious about staying with or weren't married to. It's as simple as that. The government can't control who you choose to have sex with. Doesn't imply you despise black. Can't answer. No, I've look. This is part of what is and this is unfortunately something people don't want to recognize. With any group, there are those who will not change their position. I am stuck on my view. You're stuck on your view. Why would we keep going back and forth? You know, and then I offer the concession of, okay, it's problematic that they are, you know, in some cases unjustly killed by officers. That was my concession, even in saying that it wasn't the pressing issue of the two. You can't even give the concession of, yes, it is bad that blacks are so often killed by their own kind. Won't even do that. So that's how you know that the conversation cannot have any fruitful developments. Yeah, Trex, that's what I don't understand. If I'm speaking about the problems that I feel this group really has, and this is again part of the this group think that they want us to surrender to, which has never been the case in any side or community. If you go back to the March on Washington, which was organized during the Civil Rights Movement, you had many black leaders who opposed that. You know, the hailing achievement of MLK that a lot of people, you know, praise today, that had its detractors. So this idea of we must all agree on something, or I'm going to call you a name, or try to insult you, or have this back and forth that doesn't go anywhere, is only a recent development. Okay, what else is here? But I don't understand this thing of just wanting to argue and argue and argue and argue, because it's doing nothing to get us anywhere. That name calling that was defended earlier, it doesn't do anything to get you anywhere. As I've said before, the purpose of the channel is to find solutions to dilemmas that are not part of the establishment thought. The establishment thought is, hey, forget the fact that, you know, all these blacks are being destroyed by each other in these inner cities. No, get worried about the tenth of a time that the cop does it. The establishment thought is, hey, this guy had problems with women. Well, all the other guys who have problems with women must also, you know, likely be susceptible to surrendering to this extremist view. Another establishment thought is, oh, what's that? You think the Republican is bad? Oh, you must be a Democrat. Oh, you think the Democrat is bad? Oh, you must be Republican. When both parties are awful. Liberals hate, account, and believe one can't dictate one's actions. It's literally illegal to address the internal detrimental issues. Yeah, unfortunately, Trex, and it seems as if it just gets bad every day, because now we have people who, as you saw right there, are recognizing of the fact that there are many, such as myself, who are not going to change their position because their position has already been changed, but will keep trying to wage these continuous, non-stop arguments with those that they know oppose their view and that can defend their view. And again, what we've started seeing is the disparity between the person who's being gone after, who can give concessions about the good points of the other person's view, while the other one won't give them any credit whatsoever. All of you just saw, I said, yes, there is a problem with you know, these officers in some of these cases, and they should be brought to justice. There needs to be reform in the criminal justice system. Those are my concessions on the issue. He won't make a single one about the fact that blacks are murdering each other more time. Okay, you don't want to debate or dialogue. No, it's not about pay more attention to those that self-poison. What is like saying people die than people who. Okay, let's read this. What was the good point? What he said is like saying more people died from food poisoning than from people who like to poison others. So we should pay more attention to those that self-poison. I'm so confused by this. Yeah, you know, I think a lot of these people who have this view that, because it's one thing to say, I don't agree with the position you have. Commenters like this are trying to turn the U.S. into the USSR. You know, we're going Soviet Union, because it's one thing to have the disagreement, but the fact that you are so upset with someone else having an opinion that's not the same as yours, and then it gets so irrational. Look at this. people, what I said is like saying more people die from food poisoning than from people who like to poison others, so we should pay more attention to those that self-poison. I don't understand that. I mean, he might as well have just posted some rap lyrics. I'm confused. What is not a good point about what I said? You focus on what is causing the majority of deaths. Truthfully, if we wanted to get to even more of the heart of the issue, you would go after the various African Americans who have died as a result of some kind of health ailment or in a car accident. Those are other issues that are also more often to happen than the police shootings. They're acting as if this is the centerpiece of our dilemmas when I wouldn't even put it in the top 10. Yeah, Dirk, we're letting him. When he said is like saying more people died from food poisoning than being poisoned by others who never go to jail. So we should pay more attention to those that self-poison. Trek says liberals think it's politically incorrect to address issues that kick in the cognitive dissonance of people. You're saying it to someone who identifies as liberal. I must be some other kind of one, apparently. Uh, I don't know what the point of this comment is. I'm confused. You're not reading it how I wrote it. When he said, what he said is like saying more people died from food poisoning than from being poisoned by others who never go to jail. So we should pay more attention to those that self-poison. Yeah, AOU, I'm just as confused as you. Uh, I don't see where my position is that ridiculous. If a problem afflicts people more often than another issue, why not pay more attention to the one that's doing more to impact people? I'll give my own example. If 90% of all deaths in the US were the result of car accidents, and then only 10% were the results of, I don't know, storms, I would go after the car accidents because it's afflicting more people. Its attention would be proportionate to the larger number of individuals it's impacting. But even if I've gotten this, I don't see how this makes what I said any more invalid than when I initially said it. Look, there was a time when I actually did believe in, getting all incensed about those aren't caught, so of course it makes sense to go after. But the black on black crimes are caused by people, so why wouldn't you go after the people that are causing these? Which you say I got it, and then all of a sudden, I agree with VVS. This is comedic, but I'm doing this to illustrate the point that they want these filibusters that have fascist elements to them, but also are attempts to control. So make an example to act. Yeah. Okay. So I'm tired of the filibuster now. The person will. We already know the person will declare they've won and I've lost, even though that doesn't do anything to dissuade the point I was making. But okay. Also, I just found that that's another chapter of our dark times. Well, if VVS just agrees with everything, you've come in here just to disagree with everything. You've literally been against all points I've made. And in being against those points, you haven't done anything to counteract what I've said or make any concession on any of those points. I said earlier, it's problematic that you have individuals who will come onto these streams and to the person who's streaming insult them to their face and then expect to still stay in the stream and still expect to be respected. And you start telling me something about the social justice warriors as opposed to actually debating or speaking about what I was referring to. And this issue of these police shootings has just been all over the place and jumping at something else to try and dissuade from the fact that you didn't do anything to disprove a majority of African American homicide deaths are by other African Americans. Yeah, the emotion overwhelming the logic. And look, I get it. When you turn on that television and or the news and you see, this person's been shot by Officer Griswold or whatever, I can completely, and it seems like it's every couple of days or weeks or months. Okay, sure, whatever. But there are websites online, and if you actually go and look up these shootings, you'll find it for yourself. They're not being as reported, um, as widely, but it's still a constant thing. So, yeah, that filibuster has been overruled. But I'm glad you guys were able to see that because you can recognize the inability to go anywhere with that discussion. It's like the person who's doing it doesn't recognize you're not going to change my mind. I'm not going to change your mind. So why just keep going back and forth? No, no, scoring. Why would I keep going back and forth with you over this? Well, you want this stream to be like 3 hours long? We just keep arguing over and over. I put my phone down for a couple minutes to go get a burger and come back. Well, no, I wanted you to see how that can go on and drag on and uh, never resolve. And it could be resolved just like this. I'll do it right now. There are problems with officers killing African Americans in many cases. And officers who do that should be brought to justice, and there should be thorough investigations into the events surrounding the death. But there is a larger and higher number of African Americans who are murdered by members of their own community that should also be focused on. There, that's the concession. That's the solution. It's just been solved. But again, that person won't give me credit. They won't acknowledge what I've had to say as having any validity. It'll be completely ignored because that's the world we live in now. No more free thought. No more that you think. I do acknowledge that you think policing should be reformed. It's just you at the same time finding an issue with people focusing on cops at all. No, I'm not upset with people focusing on cops. I'm upset with them doing that while not paying any attention whatsoever to homicides as it afflicts the community within the community. Well, they think it's selling out if you address a lot of things, man. I don't even bother that much anymore. Because it's part of a concentrated effort to make whoever has that view feel horrible about themselves and call them all these different terms and names, and none of it does anything to advance their current circumstance. I just wish they would recognize that. Fascism didn't work anywhere else. It's been implemented and won't work here either. That name calling thing the guy tried to do earlier won't fix income inequality or the misinformation about these parties, the fact that people get tricked by these candidates. There's not as much. Okay, this says something that has to be fought. I mean, if we wanted to look up the number of crimes with African Americans getting murdered that haven't been solved that we can deduce were done by someone that either was black or not a criminal or not a officer, that's also accessible. I don't know where he's basing that claim off of. What would citizens focusing on black on black crime do to solve it exactly? Dissuade it? I mean, if we look at the police incidents, you've had a number of officers who are now reluctant to pull the trigger in many circumstances where it's not all the way improbable to believe that they could have gotten away with executing the person in a scenario because they don't want the scrutiny. Basically, tell criminals to stop being criminals. Again, what is your solution? We continue to ignore it? If so, kindly vote for the Chicago mayor in this next election because that's all he's doing. I don't understand. Why would we not address problems? When is not talking like, okay, so let's just not speak about anything of any importance ever again, and all these things will be solved. Again, that's why this is dark times. It's not just the problem by itself that's the issue. You have people who are advocating to pretend it's not going on in some narrow-sighted belief that apparently it will resolve itself. Oh yeah, with Trex, if we talk about, yeah, it'll get better. It'll get better. You're the one trying to say, oh, it over. Why would it not need more attention if more people are afflicted by it? Again, that you're not. What is the point of this continuous thing of going back and forth? I don't get it. Blue Blazing asks, are you having girl problems? Yeah, I'm having problems with all kind of stuff. Yeah, if you don't talk about them, they'll never be solved. I agree with Dirk. Okay, let's see what else is here. Yeah, ALU is having the time of his life giggling at the expense of the people in here. You know, I would also, and this is to kind of go back to an earlier point we had, I would wager that if you were to probe the mind of Scoring 57, he'd probably have a negative view of me for having a negative view of the lack of attention that's being paid to this issue, and that he probably doesn't agree with my political views either. And yet somehow he's still sitting in my chat room, still watching me, still trying to see what I have to say. And the other guy who left that comment earlier, he's still going to try to comment later on. Let me say hello to Brought Vulture. And people wonder why there's this correlation of, you have to admit there's something attractive about what's wrong to people. They have this thing about, oh, let's do something that's incorrect, or that we the abnormal should be made normal in our own lives for some reason. Because nobody else does this. Like if you were to ask most of the other people in the chat room, they probably like what I have to say, or at least agree with a good chunk of the things I have to divulge. And just these couple of users, man, I don't know what it is. Yeah, Bra Vulture, we were talking about a variety of things. It's not non-answers. Going to, that's, no, the repeated cycle is the fact that I've offered concessions on this issue, and you've chosen to act as if I didn't, while also insisting something that is afflicting a larger group of people doesn't matter as much as something that is going after a smaller chunk. And that's it. I mean, look, if you were to say, well, you know what, I don't think we need a solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and I said, but we have Palestinians that are being butchered and murdered, and you know they're going around and getting treated as subhuman, and you go, but the Israeli economy is doing horribly and it's affecting the Israelis, and then we find out there's more Palestinians than Israelis, but you know this smaller group is more impacted by this, so there's that. But yeah, I don't understand. Okay, but Scoring, if my opinion is so bad, why do you still insist on writing back to me? What is so attractive about me to make you just want to keep writing back? What is so appealing about my my voice where you can't just leave my live stream? I don't understand. And clearly my view isn't so insane if all these other people are agreeing with it. Unfortunately, we live in you challenge ideas you disagree with. Yeah, but I'm not gonna, have a filibuster over it. Okay, no, a Ferris wheel rather. Okay, Trek says, unfortunately, we live in a society where people want to hear what they want to hear, and if you chatter on to something else, you're ostracized. I agree. Now, that's the thing with most of these problems. I've tried to give some solution on how, and I'm saying that based off the fact that they're not going away with what we're currently doing. So, for example, the current solution to the black on black crime thing is don't say anything. Is it being solved? Are blacks suddenly not killing each other as much? No. If you go to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the solution to that is let's keep the same Israeli prime minister who's been in office for the last 20 years and under whom we haven't seen any change in getting a peace settlement. Do you see a solution? No. Another problem would be let's keep electing such and such party to office in our state or city. Do you see a change? No. So all of this has been accompanied with something that is at least attempting to, maybe try and mix things up a bit. Okay, and now it's my fault, according to Spring, or Scoring rather. Although we've covered many topics, I want to join in. It's just well, we're getting close to the end of it. It's just overall issues that I felt were afflicting um, the I guess the U.S., the world maybe. I was talking about income inequality, student loan debt being ridiculous, people having a hard time getting out of the middle class, or the lower class rather, black on black crime being ignored in favor of complaining about the cop stuff, which happens a lot less. I mean, people are now arguing with facts. I can't even believe it. What else was here? There's just many things that we've thrown out there. Engage in something. No, I don't have a problem with defending my position, but again, you keep throwing out all of these examples and things that just aren't doing much to correct the problem. Again, how is not paying attention to black on black crime solved it? It hasn't. I like to still have faith to ALU, but if they're going to pretend these issues aren't afflicting us and then choose to be bothered with something else, I don't know what else to do. I mean, most of it won't directly have to do with me, but I don't, like the idea of it still being a thing. Yeah, Tracks the Truth apparently does. That's why you have the one guy come in here and say, "Why are you whining?" Again, can't offer any solutions, but we can sure try to insult someone. Well, I personally believe that brought Vulture. We should focus more on, in my opinion, but apparently going after what's happened to Moore is insane. That idea could never happen. Okay, Brawl Vulture says they always seem to bring. I always saw police brutality, so that's all I heard about from them. Whew. Hands getting tired a little bit. Okay, according to the 90. Yeah, Hell News. That's what I've been saying. But a lot of liberals actually will say, well, since it kind of statistically matches what other groups are doing, it's not that big of a deal. Like, yeah, but we're a minority, whereas whites are a majority. So why would we? I mean, if we find out that 80% of whites don't know American history post, or rather pre 1970, and then we find out that a slightly higher number of blacks know that, is that going to make it okay because Caucasians do it as well. Yeah, hell, I've heard that line, whatever. Apparently not VVS. That's a bad thing. Would we then have to consider the education levels of these areas and poverty? Yeah, but here's the thing. That's not being done. And I want people to recognize that because you have so many that are acting as if under Trump things have gotten better or have gotten worse. I think they've stayed exactly the same. And that's something else we went on earlier in the stream, Bro Vulture, that you have people who are effectively deciding, well, you know what? This party has made things better. And then you look at the statistics as it impacts, a city or a community, it's still the same. Okay, what did Trek say? To where he's getting, because, yeah, I agree, Trex, but, whatever. That's just you and me. We're the unintelligent ones because we think that if you go after some that is more problematic than something else, it's heresy to not to do that rather in the minds of those who oppose our view. No, it's not about protesting. It's about acknowledging it and trying to figure out how to stop it. Okay. Uh, so how did build? Oh man, here comes another debate. Trex, I must warn you, we'll be here all night. uh, this will go on over and over. I don't get this. If you don't like what I have to say, why are you in the stream? AOU. Now, when you and I spoke, and I'm not intending to. This won't be anything personal of you, but I mentioned that you know part of the reason I've made it to where it's that small group of people I speak with is because what's the point of recognizing the downward spiral of a group if members of it don't? And if anytime you bring up something that has to do with them, they just throw out this grasping at straws in different areas to try and make it seem okay. Now, you don't do that, and I appreciate you for that. I think Brock Vulture might also not do that. No, we'll find out. Okay, Hell says, but I do agree that we have an issue with all, and we shouldn't be. Wait, let me read this. Hell News says, but I do agree that we as black people have an issue with killing each other with all of the other issues that we have. We shouldn't be killing each other at all. Thank you. Okay, Trek says victimization is hurting the black community. Nobody is ignoring, but we're thriving at with worse conditions. Yeah, I mean that could be a whole separate stream by itself. The only is different at which. Okay, that's come on, man. This is going on forever. Again, if you don't like my view, just leave. Go. You have the option of doing that. I don't know why you don't. No one else would do this. I wouldn't do it. This is just very ALU apparently opposites attract seemingly in this scenario. I really hope scoring isn't subscribed because if he is, then that ALU that'll go back to something else we spoke about the liking of the disliked. Not really. I mean, none of them seem to. No, Vulture. People just always have this thing about trying to oppose whatever view I have, and I'm just like, so what? I mean, that's kind of the alternative to just like as the guy was talking about complaining and oh you're whining about this. I could just as easily turn the camera off and decide not to speak about any of these things ever again. And I wouldn't be impacted by most of these issues other than maybe one. And I would just go and look for the solution for that on my own. I've chosen to speak about these things for the sake of believing that there was a group of people, whether it be large or small, that also subscribe to my ideology, or at least parts of it. So when you have people who have convinced themselves, well, you know what? Uh, I'm going to have this never ending argument with you over this topic. It just makes me want to turn the computer off and say, well, forget it. It should it's a challenge if they find harmful to themselves. Okay, so my view, wait a second, so let me get this straight. My opinion is more harmful than a gang member firing into a vehicle or a drug dealer selling his product or just so okay. All right, my opinion is more harmful than any of the actions that could be described that one would consider harmful. Physical things, okay. Again, if these beliefs are so toxic and dangerous that one is always welcome to leave. It's never been easier to click to another tab or another window on if you're using a computer or not, depending on what it is. Two people just did that. I applaud them for that. Yeah, I agree with ALU. Oh, it's been a heated discussion. People have been going back and forth and consistently arguing and going into things. All right, so um, as I said at the start of the stream, there are problems, and if someone is not willing to pretend like are actually doing anything to anyone is a little disingenuous. No, I didn't pretend my opinions are doing anything to anybody. It's your choice to log on to your computer and to pull up whatever content I have out and to go and listen to it. You're the one who said that this is a belief that was detrimental to you, as if, my belief is stronger than an executive order or some bill being signed into law by your governor. So that was your own statement. No, but AOU, I'm glad you've recognized the purpose of this. It is to say that these problems by themselves are not why they are dangerous. It's the fact that you have people such as the one that you just saw me going back and forth with who are not willing to recognize them. The longer these are ignored and treated like they're not going on, um, it won't get fixed. Yeah, but Broad Vulture, you can't have a discussion with someone if they're not willing to make concessions on the other side. I made all the concessions I could give, um, and this other person said, "Well, forget that." So, thank you for watching. I am tucked out of something out tomorrow. Um, I hope we've been over many of the problems, and these are not good times. And unfortunately, a lot of people think that they are. So it's a dilemma that we currently face, and hopefully it'll be solved in the future. But since we have this tendency to go and say, "Well, I want someone else to do that for me," I'm not truly considering that it will. My sentiments are harmless, yet you want sentiments that are anti-criminal. I mean, I've already displayed sentiments that are anti-criminal. I don't see how being anti-criminal is not harmless and powerless, or rather without cause of violence. Someone stating something I think is much better than having some fist fight or some continuous back and forth. So that's as simple as that. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the filibuster. Um, I just hope that one day this ends, that people won't keep trying to turn the U.S. into the USSR, and that hopefully we can just recognize that there are issues that aren't being solved. And yeah, it's still going on down here. We're wrapping it up. Hopefully, we can recognize our problems that aren't being solved by the current policies we have in place, be they made by those in positions of power or activists, and you know, just I I am a huge. No, no one's saying anything about being a huge communist. The fact that you've chosen to become so dispirited with someone merely stating something and try to go back and forth with them and make them feel ashamed for having that perspective. Again, if you truly feel your views were seen that way or portrayed that way by me, I would recommend unsubscribing and not watching my content anymore. There's always that. So thank you for watching. Have a good day, and we'll have something else out tomorrow. So see you.